You can be replaced.
That's my goal, is to try and be replaced.
I'm trying to be replaceable.
Be forgettable.
This question inspired a dialogue that I wanted to have with my coaches. Not my coaches, coaches who are part of an organization that people call mine. That's why I called it a think tank. I don't think that any individual person can be all or know all things. So bringing a bunch of people that I believe in together to all try to contribute to the same problem, I think is going to create a better long-term strategy for success in sport, business, and life. Any suggestions for how to build snatch strength when overhead squat weight is great, but you can't seem to snatch anywhere close to it? I think a lot of people assume that we're only working with high-level athletes or only asking really aggressive questions that are, you know, out in the clouds of theory. And I thought that would be a really practical thing to discuss, because I know there are a ton of people out there that struggle to improve in their snatch, and I think we could have potentially maybe not methods in this discussion that will allow you to get better, but places that you could go and different ways of thinking about how to develop your snatch that are outside of just the traditional, like, here's a snatch program. So Adam, you want to just, what are your initial thoughts when you hear something, when you hear a question like that? How do you even think about that type of a discussion?
Yeah, in general, if I see somebody who's got a really big discrepancy there, I want to see video of the snatch. There's just so many limitations that can go into getting the bar in place when you've got to take it from the floor versus like a back rack jerk. So what's their shoulder mobility like? What's their ability to maintain thoracic extension and resist flexion as you're going through the pulling pattern? You know, are they finding extension in their lumbar versus their hips as they're going through the top of the second pull to put them in a bad position in the catch? There's just a lot of things that can go wrong in that chain, and the only way I can really break that out and figure out how to help that person is to see the video. Break the video down at different loads, different percentages, and try and really figure out what's going on there.
Mike, similar thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I actually had someone text me the other day and say, hey, I'm getting into some design for clients here. These are the guys' numbers. And he sent me like the snatch, the back squat, the overhead squat. And he said, based on these, I feel like this guy's, based on like his snatch relative to overhead squat number, this is what I think his issue is. And I was like, yeah, you might be right. But at the same time, you still need to see it, because if his overhead squat is much, like it's very close to his snatch weight, it could be something totally different than if his overhead squat number is much higher than his snatch weight. So again, like, you can look at those numbers and try and get some relation with them and figure it out, but you're just probably kind of wasting time unless you just see the video and figure out like how technical is he with the lift.
Yeah, so I think the question just brings up assessment in general, that you need to assess what the problem is, not just look at those two numbers and say, okay, this is the issue. First, just at a basic level, is the bottom of your overhead squat vertical? Because if you're really sat back and then your arms are really pulled back behind you, it's just not a very biomechanically efficient position to catch it. So the first thing I'd probably do, if I didn't have access to the video, which I don't because she didn't send the video, is I would say, okay, is your overhead squat good and your snatch balance good? Because then it gives you an indication of, okay, is it a dynamic stability issue that you can't stabilize the bar as you're descending into the squat? Or like, I'm very comfortable stabilizing it from a jerk position, and then once it's in place, I can stabilize it slowly. Then I'd probably look at a hang snatch, going all the way under the snatch to see what the shoulder rotation looks like. Are they really looping the bar out and trying to throw it behind them and catch it? Or are they able to kind of keep a bar path nice and tight and come up the body? And then I'd go through like just the first pull sequence and see if they can get off the floor in appropriate positions. But I generally find that issues like this are movement related. Have either of you guys had anybody that had great movement quality that still had a similar issue to this? Because I have, but
I wouldn't say a similar issue. I think that people that have a high movement quality, if we can figure out what the main limiter is, usually their uptake on the skill acquisition is going to be higher, so we can attack it relatively efficiently. Mike has a really interesting client who can actually snatch more than the overhead squat. That's
yeah. I'm trying to remember who that is.
He's sitting right next to you.
Oh, yeah.
He said, that's me.
No, it's just, I think if we can figure out where the skill is, and it's sort of dependent on what that athlete's background is, what's the sort of limitations that you're playing with, what's their exposure to having a coach on site who's worked them through the lifts, or did they have to figure out themselves, come up with their own cues in their head that may or may not be efficient for them inside of that lift. It sort of lets you know which path you have to go down to figure out how to get them in a position to snatch with their overhead squatting. But like you're saying, you have to be able to see what's going on as much as possible to figure out where the limitation is. Like you said, if it's the ability to be able to dissociate what's going on with your hands with what's going on with your spine and your rib cage, the ability to actually find true hip extension and not get your back in a bad position, because then when you add this dynamic speed to it, you're always going to be in a compromised spot when you catch, which is different than an overhead squat, where now you can stabilize as you go down. You can breathe actively through your rib cage and keep everything locked down.
Yeah. So the people that I've seen that have the ability to overhead squat really well and not snatch well, that have good movement quality, are generally people that are very low tension, like yogis, or people that have a huge endurance background that have never done any strength training. And then when they try to coordinate speed, they have so many options in their bottom position that they just have like so much wobble. But when you really slow it down and they could stabilize just the catch, then their overhead squat, it's high, but there's still a lot of wobble in it. But because the wobble is happening slowly, they can kind of self-coordinate on the way down and on the way up. But in a snatch, you just miss that lift. So from a practical takeaway standpoint, if somebody is that person, if they're really, really low tension as an individual, you probably just need years of strength work, assuming your snatch technique is good enough, and you probably need things that are that will increase tension. So even something like bodybuilding protocols that desaturate you, high volume overhead squatting, practicing like plyometric speed training to create global stiffness. That's probably the best kind of short-term practical application standpoint or recommendation I could give for people that have problems snatching and not and can overhead squat well. You guys have anything you want to add to those style of people?
No, I would say the majority of the people I deal with, or I would say if I'm comparing cases, is most of the time they can overhead squat well, but they can't catch the snatch well. So it's position.
Okay,
it's
so
position focused.
Let's go into that as a second category. So the first category is I have the movement freedom to get into the position, but I don't have enough strength or stability or dynamic stability. The second, or movement variability in the bottom. That second group of people that have an understanding of what the technique is, they have the strength to do an overhead squat, but they don't have the positions required to actually snatch well. What do you guys see as like the common, like these are the common issues that I see, and here are some like tools that you could use to get better at them?
So I'll just take an example. If someone can overhead squat well from a rack, they usually are really good at just moving in that one direction. The bar is set, they only have that one range of motion. So when they try to pull a snatch from the ground, anything that is out of position whatsoever, they have no consistency catching it. So I try to, one, like, is it a bottom position issue? So usually they can't set well in the bottom, so I try to make the lift less complex. So we usually start from the top. We do a lot of lifts from the hang so they can keep it simple first and then work their way down over a progression of 4 to 6 weeks. So maybe a week or two is like lifts from the high hang so they can practice actually extending and catching and then landing in the bottom, and then we work our way down because the lift just gets more complex, I think, as you go lower to the floor. And at the same time, we're also working like doing really slow eccentrics going to the ground, making them get more strength and move, or basically mobility in the bottom position of that snatch, so it doesn't throw them out of position.
Yeah, for me, when I think about positions, I think about being able to consistently get in the same positions, which I think is huge for something as dynamic as a snatch. all the speed and all the load that you're trying to control throughout this motion, it's going to get thrown off if this foot goes forward a little bit, or if this one goes wide when you're trying to transition, or if I'm forward with my torso and I'm back with my hands. So how can you build consistency in their training routine for that skill to make sure that as the load gets higher and they get higher up in their percentages, they're still being able to hit the same positions every time? I mean, I think positional strength, I mean, if they can overhead squat that load that's maybe like 30 to 50 pounds heavier and they can sit in the bottom of it, it's not really as much about positional strength there. I think it's about being able to find that position and acquire it with speed and load. So how can we figure out how to do that? And I think that just comes down to probably lower level skill drills than people are used to doing, but it's about finding consistency with the feet, finding how to brace out in the midsection when you get down there dynamically. So it could be things like snatch balances where you slowly move into adding a more foot transition from a heaving to a regular snatch balance as they go, continuing to always find speed with the lockout.
Yeah, so it's for that group of people, it's almost, it sounds like, and I think I agree, it's an exercise selection issue.
Yeah.
You're trying to find the exercises that take something like a snatch that's really, really complicated and breaks it down to its subcomponent parts and train each one of the subcomponent parts, hoping that we integrate it back together.
Yeah, put them in a position where they almost can't fail. Like, let's make this really simple to where let's start with just like a jump and a land, and then add complexity as you go. And through a ton of repetition too, like, I don't like trying to load it too quickly, like tons and tons and tons of reps where it's purely based off quality. So I might say something like accumulate 30 singles from the blocks at the mid thigh. You know, don't add weight unless the rep is absolutely perfect. And that takes a lot of discipline from the client, but you got to explain, like, this is the understanding right now that, like, we're trying to build this pattern and we're not trying to just add load on this. We want you to, like, we want to get rid of the old movement and build this new one now. Like, that old movement is dead, it's gone.
Yeah. So when people go through this process, I find that they always feel like whatever is new, they say is awkward or doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
But what they were using before wasn't right in the first place. So anything new is going to feel wrong because they've never actually felt what's appropriate. So I think that's the last group of people that I'd say, and I think the question might illustrate that you potentially could be, or the person that asked that Instagram question could be one of those people, is that there is a cognitive approach to all motor learning, and you can learn things by better understanding what those things you need to get better are. And that can happen by finding a group of experts that are even experts in lifting that may not know that much about coaching to observe, so you can mirror their patterns, getting one-on-one coaching to understand what positions your body is supposed to be able to get into. Videos like this, they're all over the internet in Olympic lifting because there's so many people that want to get better at them. If you have any pains that are like in your ankles and your knees and your hips and your back that are going on, some of it could be limited by actual pain. Like, so I think there's an educational process that everybody needs to go through if they want to get better at a specific skill. This is a weird sport or a weird fitness market in that, like, when you play a sport and you ask people like, oh, how many people are on the field? How long does this game play? Where are you supposed to go with the ball in this type of situation? If you ask an expert, they know all the different subcomponents of all the skills that are required for the sport. But in a sport like weightlifting, it's quasi-simple. It's like, take this barbell, put it over your head in one movement. I know it's much more complicated than that for real experts, but people still have no idea where the bar is supposed to be, where the bar is supposed to be at each position, what the joints need to be able to do to coordinate those positions. So some of this, it's good that you're asking the question because you're on the process of actually learning and getting better. But hopefully that's enough kind of a practical takeaway, understanding of what goes into the development of a snatch and how that's different than an overhead squat and how you can get better at your snatch.
Yeah. Man, I have one more thing I want to add.
Can I
add it?
Yeah. He didn't stop, did he?
Did you stop? All right, so when it comes to practicing these lifts too, a lot of times I see clients make the mistake of treating it as they know it's a weakness and it's something they have to work on. So the attitude that they have when they approach the lifts, is wrong. They go in and they're doing it and they're not playing, they're not in flow. They're doing a lift and you see the video, they're shaking their head. They knew right away that was wrong. So they're just like, they're trying to pound the new movement into their head. And you have to go into it with a more accepting attitude, thinking like, I'm in here playing right now, right? Like I'm enjoying this. This is a fun thing to do. Okay, that one didn't feel right. Let me try and do the next one better. If you constantly going into it telling yourself wrong, wrong, wrong all the time, it's gonna be really hard to learn. You guys. I just exhaled the whole time. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think the process of learning any skill is frustrating. You're gonna have good days, bad days. You're gonna feel like it's perfect one day, not be able to replicate it. So
I don't know if they can hear me or not, but that your thing that you just said reminded me of playing guitar. Like if I was playing a riff and I kept messing up, I wouldn't go, ugh!
Yeah, right? You're playing guitar,
You're playing,
right?
and it's just like, okay, I'll keep doing it, I'll get better. But for some reason with the lifts,
we're not playing, but maybe we should look at it that way.
Yeah. I'm really happy you did not hit that camera on the wall.
Later, bitches.
That's basically
I didn't know
was.
who you were talking about. I was like, well, I don't want to say like.
I figured that you didn't know that. That's why I said that's me.
Hold on, show me, what is it?
It's this guy who's pretending to be 11 from Stranger Things, and I seriously can't tell the difference at all. And Chris is saying that he can. I think it's probably the actor, to be honest with you.
Oh my god. What did it feel like yesterday to have your coach forget you on video?
I mean, it was humbling, I guess. I know I'm not the highest level athlete out there. But I can't blame him, you know.
I think you threw him off just because you said you probably thought like a other client, not you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't expect him to immediately think of me or have me come to mind when I ask him questions like that. It's like I wasn't sitting right next to him, or we hadn't just talked about myself as an athlete going through the qualifier or something.
Are you going to hire Brandon or someone else now?
Yeah, I don't know. I might just start writing my own stuff again. At least find a coach who cares.
Yeah.
I can't really blame Mike. I tend to be a somewhat forgettable athlete. I think I worked with Max for 3 years or something, and it took him 2 years to not spell my last name with a D. So, just me and coaches, I guess. They tend to forget about me.